I have just talked about what is the concept of ethnography, and I'm going to take that to the next level, which we call autoethnography. Now, auto in this case means oneself, and ethnography means to do essentially a scientific study on oneself. Now, this is a concept that doesn't fit well with everybody because, the problem with ethnography is, ethnography is really good, except for it's not very generalizable. And there's a problem of what we call going native, losing your criticality, right? Sympathizing too much with the people you're studying and failing to highlight some of their problems, issues. So with autoethnography, you're not just going native, you are, you couldn't be more native. You are essentially within your natal self. You see and understand the world through the way you see and understand the world. So how are you supposed to analyze how you see and understand the world when you're analyzing you, right? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in that capacity. So I think it's very fair to say that autoethnography is not a social scientific tool that is used all that often. And it is certainly not a social scientific tool that has sort of the highest levels of respect amongst academics. But this is not to say that autoethnography fails to have a place within the academic realm of research. If you take somebody who's a skilled ethnographer and who has a reason to study themselves, then you may have a good purpose for autoethnography. Now, you might be wondering, like, how is an autoethnography any different than a biography? Or a autobiography. So I'll just give an example here. So I have written a book called Trailblazing, and this is about my experiences coming out of the closet as America's first openly gay high school coach. The year was 1993. There was a very high degree of cultural homophobia in America, particularly in the county that I came out. And coming out created this sort of firestorm that I wrote about. And I was a very successful coach. And so there's this really nice drama of my athletes and I battling and winning, right? Both on the field and off the field, battling runners on the field, on the track, and battling homophobia off the track. Well, it's actually on the track as well, but you get the idea. There's these two themes here. And so it's a compelling story. But to make it an autoethnography, it has to have something more than just a telling of the events. It has to have some evidence. It has to be based in notes that are taken at the time. It has to have some form of validity to it. So for me, my autoethnography came from the fact that I took it from my journal. I wrote my journal because we all know that memory doesn't serve us well. Memories are easily created that are not true. We gloss over things. Memory is highly falsifiable. But I took a diary that I kept for 4 years on my experiences after coming out, and I used that as the basis to craft what went into my autoethnography. Now, I also backed that up with some interviews. So I sent, I asked some of the key players on the team if they saw things the way that I did. And then the other thing I did is I sent out that manuscript for essentially what we call peer review to the peers that were in the story. And I asked them, if they thought that this resonated, if there's anything that wasn't quite right. And so essentially you're doing some fact checking to make sure that you keep the validity of the story up. But the next thing that autoethnography ought to have is not just, like, how do we know this was said, and what is the facts, and how do we know that these facts are real, and how do we know that this isn't just one's biased perception of their own interactions. And by the way, actually, before I get to the next part, we can also judge autoethnographies, because if you're reading an autoethnography and the person is just always displaying themselves in the best light possible, right? There's something funny there, right? if they're not saying, and here's when I made a big mistake, and here's what I feel bad about, because we are all human beings, we all make mistakes. And so if you're only showing one side of the story, then are you really going to trust the whole thing? So you have to have that. You got to have that proof, if you will, a bit of social proof to make you credible. But the other thing you have to have is some concept of sociology or anthropology in general. And you have to relate the experiences that you're having through some theoretical modality. Now, there are a number of types of theory, and those run from grand theories and philosophies to what we call macro, meso, and right down to micro theories. And I'm not saying that an autoethnography has to have a particular type of theory, but there needs to be a relationship between what goes on there and what goes on either in the local culture or the broader society at large. And there needs to be this theoretical application. So for me, for example, the theoretical application that I used in this one is this notion that I call it homohysteria, which is that heterosexual men, when they are afraid of being thought gay, they will act out in homophobic ways. But when they're not afraid of being thought gay, they won't. And so, there's sort of this basis here. There's this some theoretical basis of social prejudice that occurs that comes into the book. And so, I might be telling a story. It might be a compelling story about a time that something horrific happened to one of the athletes on my team, horrific homophobic incidents. But I still draw in some theoretical understandings of why that might have happened, right? So I base it in sociological literature more broadly. And when you do that, that is an academic autoethnography. For me, I decided the academic autoethnography, it was just a bit too much. It took away from the compelling story. So, there's no references in my book. I published it and I called it an autobiography, although I think actually it's much, much closer to a autoethnography. So that's the world of autoethnography. It's some serious navel gazing. It's some serious navel gazing, right? You're really looking at yourself. But hey, if you have a compelling story, then, might be an absolutely fantastic form of research method to understand your relationship to society a bit more broadly. Thank you.